definitely after I failed the first one in July, I was pretty discouraged. I'm sure a lot of people are, and I didn't want to overstress myself by just saying, okay, I need to immediately study. I need to immediately find out what I did wrong, and I need to fix like everything. Like I was like, okay, I probably need to spend some time thinking about what I did wrong. For me, I didn't find just cramming helpful.
Mhm.
Like I said, I had a very busy work schedule.
Bonjour guys, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to interview Alicia. Alicia graduated in 2020 and she got her major, her bachelor's in environmental engineering. And she took the FE exam twice before she passed it. And so in this video, she's going to share with us her FE experience and what she did to pass her FE. Alicia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Okay, now, so tell us a little bit about your college experience. What kind of student were you in college?
Okay. So I felt like especially with entering the engineering field, like I wasn't the type of student where something, clicked very immediately. I always had to write everything down, notes, be really attentive to that. And things always never clicked the first time, but I was the type of student where I drilled things over and over again and not just overworked myself, but drilled something once. What did I do wrong? Did something again. Did I do something else wrong? Until I started to pick up the pace a little bit. So I definitely had to work very hard with my courses. Things didn't come super easy. And I definitely had to reevaluate what my learning style was. Even now, after college, still just always got to pay attention to what's the best way that I learn and catch on to things.
Yeah. Okay, now why did you decide to take the FE?
So for me, I wanted to take the FE exam. So initially, like I graduated spring 2020, which was when everything COVID started happening, and I scheduled my exam for before I graduated. So back in like March of 2020. So actually, not I think earlier than that, maybe like February. So why I really wanted to take it was I feel like if you had the opportunity to set yourself apart from other applicants when graduating and finding a job, then you should go for it. You should take every opportunity to try to do so. So I definitely know that with environmental and civil, definitely like it's almost like a must that you have your FE and you take it, or at least you try to take it. So I really wanted to take it to just kind of, kind of test myself. Like, did I learn anything in school? And I really wanted to apply myself. So that's why I tried to take it before graduating. Obviously, with COVID and everything happening, it was a struggle because my exam just constantly kept getting pushed back and back. And then eventually they just NCEES like emailed everyone, was like, okay, here's a refund, just pick a date. And it just got super stressful, just having all your plans kind of like rearrange. And I ended up having to schedule it in the summer. I believe July, I think. And so it was stressful because I really wanted to have that before graduating. And I really wanted to have that before applying myself in the workplace. And it was stressful graduating and not having that already.
Mm.
Um, but at the same time, like I was still determined to take it just for my sake and, just to really like, it doesn't matter when I take it, I should take it. This is good for me. This is good for my field. And I wanted to at least go for it. So
Yeah. So
stressful.
yeah, it's a lot of it did put a lot of people behind, like a lot of people were planning to take it this day so that they can get the job or, before they graduate. And the
Mhm.
whole COVID situation really affected a lot of people in terms of like when to take the FE. Now, I know like you took it twice. So when was the first time that you took it?
So the first time that I took it was sometime in July of 2020, a couple months after I
Oh,
graduated.
you did. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So you took the new one then.
Yes, that was a big factor too, is I studied for the old one and there wasn't too many changes as far as the new July 2020 exam, but still the fact that you spend months studying for one exam and then they say, okay, we're changing it. And even though COVID happened, like you still got to take the new one. So that was definitely intimidating.
Yeah.
It's definitely a big, just mental, like just stressful thing
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay. Now, how many months before the FE did you start studying? So you took the first one in July 2020 and you didn't pass it. And then you took the second time. Was it in February when you took it, 2021? Is that when you took the second time? Or January?
January
January.
2021.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you took it in January 2021 and you passed your FE. Now, so for the January one, how many months before the exam did you start studying?
For my second round.
Yeah.
So for my second attempt in January 2021, I probably started studying around, I would say, October.
Okay.
So I gave myself about like 3.5 months to
Yeah.
study.
Okay.
Definitely after I failed the first one in July, I was pretty discouraged. I'm sure a lot of people are, and I didn't want to overstress myself by just saying, okay, I need to immediately study. I need to immediately find out what I did wrong, and I need to fix like everything. Like I was like, okay, I probably need to spend some time thinking about what I did wrong. So I didn't study immediately. I just I got my exam scheduled and I was like, okay, let's figure out when I'm going to start. And I kind of spent a lot of time gathering materials just because the first time I only used the practice book they give you. And then I used the Anthem. I don't know if civil has it, but environmental has an Anthem environmental engineering practice workbook with problems. And I only used that. So I only used two things. I didn't really watch any YouTube. I didn't look through any of that until October, 4 months before my test, is when I started to see your channel and other videos on YouTube and really start studying from there, like branching out with more resources.
Okay. Now, so for the first time, you said you used Praxis Exam Anthem. Did you use notes from college as well, or is it just those two books?
Yeah, I had some notes to fall back for, especially with air quality and air pollution.
Okay.
That's like a big chapter on, or a big section for the FE exam for environmental, and was something I struggled with. So that's definitely like something I feel for environmental you don't find a lot of practice material on. So I really had to rely on my personal notes and like what I learned from environmental for that section. So other than that, maybe some chemistry. There's not too much chemistry practice material apart from like what I had in school. So yeah, mainly those kind of like the very environmentally specific subjects I had to rely on my notes from college.
Okay. And I really like how you this whole like experience you failed, you gave yourself some time to process it because it sucks.
Yeah, I was sad.
It doesn't matter like how strong you
Yeah.
are. Like I always keep telling you guys, like go in with the mindset of trying to figure out like where you are at, right? Just to see a little bit of progress. Don't go with mindset of like I have to pass this exam, and even though you go with that mindset and when you fail, it still sucks, right? Nobody likes.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's normal. You take some time to process it, and I liked how you spend a lot of time gathering information, and I think that's really important to prepare for the FE. Like you really have to know what exactly you're going to be learning, what material you're going to be using to make sure that you prepare really well for this exam.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about so before we dive into like what material you use, like tell us how many hours did you study per week or per day? Like how much time did you spend studying?
Yeah, so as we mentioned before, my commute is terrible. I have a pretty hefty work schedule with even with COVID. I didn't get to work from home like everyone else does. I still went in the office 8 hours, and then I commuted 1 hour there, 1 hour back. So I basically got my day started around, started studying maybe around like 7 p.m. And I would study about 2 hours a day. That give me just enough time to cover some problems from a workbook or do some problems online. And I found that a lot better for me because I could study 2 hours per day. At 9 o'clock, I cut myself off. I knew I was too tired. I'm not learning anything past that point. So 2 hours a day. And then on weekends, this was just what worked for me. But on weekends, it was really more of a free for all. Like I still had a life and things to do. So the weekends, I probably would maybe do more around like 4 or 5 hours. Saturdays, Sundays, maybe like 3 to 4. So definitely a huge chunk of studying time on the weekends. And then weekdays, especially while working, I just give myself more of a break, like 1 to 2 hours, do the best that I can, just kind of try to retain everything, just not try to plug and chug. So that's definitely what I found that worked for me.
Okay, that's great. Like you knew your limits and then you would just stop, because pushing to like, over your limit, like you said, you're not really grasping any material at that point and you
Mhm.
just like wasting your energy where you could be recharging so that you are ready for the next day. So,
Yeah, that's definitely something I encountered on your channel as well. Is I think I watched another interview where someone definitely mentioned like you need to know your limits. Like there comes to a certain point you're not retaining anything, you're tired, and even though you tell yourself, oh, like but I have to pass this time, like if you're not if you're mentally not there, there's no point. Like you're getting the same productivity done as if you're just relaxing and watching TV because you're so tired at that point. You might as well just take some time to just have a little leisure time. You'll get back on it tomorrow.
yeah, yeah, that's true. And I think like recharging is just as important as studying. And like I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think people should definitely have recharging in their schedule because like you could even like what we've seen with students is that they would like study a lot like and go intensely and they wouldn't take breaks and then they would burn out and they would take a month or 2 months off. And now they have this huge gap in their studying, right? So it's
Yeah.
really important to like know your limits. And I think Rosa, actually, she's the student who I interviewed, and she talks about
Okay.
she knew her limits, and then she would just stop when she reached that limits, and she wouldn't push like through because she knew that she's gonna be much better the next day when she comes back to studying. Um,
Yeah.
okay, now let's dive into material and the
Mhm.
resources. Now, so what material did you use to prepare for the FE?
So for me, the first time around, I only had the old practice book prior to July 2020, and then I had the Anthem Environmental Engineering practice book. That was honestly about it. And if I'm being honest, I talked to other students who had already taken their exams before COVID happened, and they took it early on before graduating, and that's all they used. So I thought, and for me, it wasn't like that was every student. It was just the couple students that I asked, and obviously everyone studies differently. So I tried just to focus on school and then just use those two practice books and study here and there when I could. And then definitely that wasn't enough. So the first time I took the exam, I was like, there's so much material I didn't cover and I'm missing a lot. And there's probably much easier ways to tackle this problem than what I know because I didn't cover it enough. So my second time around, what I did was I studied the new. I got the July 2020 exam. I studied that one. So mainly I used that more as like I went over it once and then I did practice exams on it. Same thing with the Anthem book. I used that again and then I went over the book once, like through every questions, and then I did practice exams. And then that's when I more found the videos on your channel because my exam, I actually had a lot of trouble with the morning session, which I feel like is not the case for a lot of people. They find it easier, but I actually had a lot of problems with morning session, I didn't remember some of the mathematics, and then kind of like the especially the like economics sections, those were really hard to understand. And after watching, your videos and signing up for your course, just seeing that other students had the exact same problem when they first tackled the problems, and then seeing their discussion, oh, I actually found that on this way, like the calculator, it's much faster. And then you'd even follow up with that in your like comments under your videos, like, oh, one of my students found a much easier way. So that was really helpful. And it almost got to the point where after that I was just even though I was environmental, like I was using a lot of your course. And then for after like learning the morning session, I had like a better just study habits and mindset to focus more on environmental after that. Because environmental, I feel like, honestly, as far as like study material, there's not as much as mechanical and civil. So you really kind of have to narrow down on like the available YouTube videos. That Anthem book was really helpful. And unfortunately, like the NCES, like that, even though that practice exam was just kind of a nightmare to get through, like it did help more when you narrow down on your own like environmental sections.
Okay. Now, so for the environmental section, was there any other material that you used to study for that portion besides the practice exams? You use your notes or anything?
So not really much of my notes anymore after that. So a lot of what's specific towards environmental is like air pollution, a lot more like water resources problems, chemistry, and things like that. And I think the biggest thing that just sounded like a given once I figured it out, but the biggest thing I didn't realize is that, especially when you're taking the FE exam, the concept, you should know basic concepts about the problem and what it's asking. But mainly it's just kind of like knowing how to cancel units. So like I'd have like a really complicated like thermal problem that's something in micrograms over meters cubed times this times that and this and that. And it's more just understanding the problem to know what units you're looking for. And it starts to kind of click after that. Like I realized when I took the test the second time, I didn't have to be an expert in like whatever the question was asking, but I did know how to like understand what it's asking for. And then it came down to canceling out units. That was like the biggest thing I realized that helped me, especially when environmental, like that, like I said, there's not a lot of material, but if you focus on just like covering what you can and then just realizing what the problem is asking for, like don't have to know the definition of everything in the sentence, but as long as you understand what the problem is asking for, you can tackle it.
Yeah. Yeah, because environmental, because like for FE Civil, when we take FE Civil, there's an environmental section.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, like you might get a problem and you're like, what are they what are they even talking about? There's a lot of technical words here, like the whole sentence is technical words put together, and you like you said, like you don't need to understand all of them. And I actually had the problem on my exam where I literally all I had to do was like kind of play around with the units, and I got the answer just by like even though I didn't have a deep understanding of what the question was about. I looked at what we want as the units as the answer, and I just took whatever they gave in the question and then play around with it, and I got the answer. And I think a lot of the problems, like knowing your units, are really important. They can help you a lot with the FE.
Especially with environmental, there's like a lot of like solid and hazardous waste, like that kind of is where like you do have to kind of just study by looking up the terms like RCRA, like subtitle D, waste limits. Like you do kind of have to really do your own research on those kind of topics and subjects. And even knowing like a wastewater treatment system, like a water treatment system, knowing like primary clarification, secondary clarification, like all that stuff. I just had to honestly Google it, and I had to, what does a water treatment system look like? I just looked at what every component consisted of, and like, then if a problem asked, oh, when wastewater is going through a sludge activated sludge system, like what's going on, then you kind of have like a conceptual knowledge enough to get your like self started on the problem and like what the actual math is asking for, kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so now, did you feel like your undergrad classes prepared you well for the FE?
I think that there was a certain few classes. Again, it's kind of hard to, when you're in such a huge class, it's kind of hard to connect, and kind of like you get to a point where it's like you're kind of just teaching yourself the material. So there was some classes that I felt did help out a lot, as far as like the FE exam. I definitely feel like for statics and dynamics, so those are actually not on the environmental exam.
Yeah.
So I was like, for me, I was just like, why did I even take these classes if it's not on my exam? But then you realize like those are core classes, like equilibrium equations, like it matters for so many other things in environmental. So just having that basic statics and dynamics, like kind of like foundation of knowledge for that helps you out with like a lot of other problems too. So definitely having like just a good understanding of those basic engineering classes, and then kind of learning how to apply it to the more like upper level was helpful. Um, Definitely not for everything, but definitely just like having a basic understanding in those core classes really helped. And then it really helps me understand more on the FE exam.
Okay.
It's just always hard to just recall those kind of things when you took them like 2 years ago, and then you're taking your exam.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
I think that's really the struggle with the FE, especially if you're still going to school, is that like the you take statics in the first, it's your first class when you start college. So by the time you graduate, you start work, you take the FE. I mean, you forgot about statics, and so it can be tricky. And that's why like some professors would actually recommend students to take the FE while they're going to school.
mm-hmm.
Although I don't necessarily agree with that. It's just because like I feel like, because you can't just like study for this exam and then at the same time study for your engineering classes, and especially senior, you're having hard topics like in college. So for me, like when my professor recommended it, I was like, I'd rather learn the information from my professor right now, learn foundation, learn hydraulics, and once I graduate, I can use that now to pass the FE. But if I try to do both, I'm not gonna grasp both of them really well. So
yeah.
So
That's definitely, I definitely agree with that. I didn't take my exam as soon as I wanted to. Definitely there's like you said, there's a lot of professors who pressure you, or not, like just kind of like really like recommend that you just take it before you graduate, just to try to take it. And I think something helpful that I encountered when I was wanting to take it during school is that basically, like for me, I didn't have air pollutions yet, and that's something that's on the environmental exam. But I just asked my professor, who luckily for me, that professor who taught air pollutions also taught other courses that I had taken already. So I just reached out to her and asked her like, what, I haven't taken air pollutions yet, but I might be taking my FE exam soon. What can I do? Like, what would you recommend that I narrow down and study on? And then honestly, she just emailed back and she said, yeah, so you're gonna want to know like these certain equations, this, I recommend this. And if your professors are helpful enough, they'll tell you like where to get started on studying for whatever subjects like you're kind of looking for if you haven't covered them yet in school before taking your exam. So that was really helpful to me to just ask my professors, just, hey, I haven't taken this yet, what should I study?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and I think a lot of professors like are very like helpful. They're like, if you just go, even if you are taking that class already, like just go to ask your professor, hey, what do you think we should focus most on for the FE, right? Because when if you take like, you know, like the air pollution class, for example, it's not going to be the whole class covered in the FE.
Mhm.
It's just going to be small portion, and then your professor was able to narrow it down for you, like, hey, focus on these points. So you can always reach out to your professor and just ask them if you really want to take the FE while you're still in college.
Mhm.
Um, okay, great. Thank you for sharing that with us. That can
Mhm.
actually be helpful for a lot of students. Now, let's talk about study techniques. Are there any study habits that you found not to be effective?
Yeah, so I know this isn't the case for a lot of people, but I just don't, for me, I didn't find just cramming helpful.
Mm,
Like I said, I had a very busy work schedule and I studied, you know, very limited, like 1 to 2 hours a day. And then on weekends, just a little more than that. So I definitely think that when I first took the exam, I just crammed. I crammed whatever I could. If I have a 30-minute break, I just study something. And I just think that that just stresses you out even more. And I think if you're just trying to cram material, you're kind of just, it gets to the point where you're going through problems, but you're not learning what the problem is even asking for. And you're just kind of not understanding it. And then it got to the point where I realized like I was studying, let's say, like the Anthem book, and I did like 10 problems. And then later on, I'd try to go back and redo the problems. And I had no idea what I just did because I just had an hour and I studied it, crammed it really fast, and I went through it. And then I tried to do it again, and I didn't even know where I started. And just really just, it's just best to try to actually do the problem. And I believe this is another thing you really emphasize in your videos is just don't look at the solution first. If you're stuck, just keep trying, keep going. And then when you're like you have nothing else to like just go off of, then you can kind of look back and forth. But each time, you know, just try to tackle the problem, even if it takes you like 30 minutes, just take your time and don't just quickly look in the solution and then fill it all out thinking you got it done because you really didn't. You just kind of, you're basically just copying a solution from there. So definitely pace yourself and don't like try to cram too hard just because you want to get it done. So,
yeah, I think you brought up really good points. Like, don't rush your studying, right? Don't rush the
mhm.
process. Take it slow, right? Make sure that you are learning the material, and like really try to attempt the problems. Don't, like, you know, don't, again, it goes back to rushing. Like, try not to like rush the whole
Mhm.
process. It just takes time, and you just got to be patient with yourself, right?
Mhm.
You know, you might get stuck in this problem, might take you an hour, the next day you're gonna try it, maybe it only takes you 30 minutes, and then
Yeah.
time might take you only 20 minutes. It's just all about
Yeah.
practice, and, you know, being patient and enjoying the process, because when you don't enjoy, not if you're not enjoying it, it's going to be very miserable because
Yeah.
it doesn't happen that quick. Like, it really takes some time and effort and consistency, and you got to be aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then definitely going off of that too, like there's no one way to solve every problem. So if you're trying something and you're like, I swear this is how you do it, or this is how I would start it, like that's not always the case, especially when you go through your course and then you start a problem and then you see like how everyone else kind of did it and you kind of see what was the best way that someone found out how to do it. Like you just realize that like you can't just be so caught up on how you solve a problem and you kind of have to like think about what's the best way, especially unfortunately with the FE, it's very like dependent on the time you take. So you have to be quick, and maybe this is not a way you're used to solving things, but it is the most efficient and you kind of have to adapt.
Yeah. It's like, don't get stuck in your own ways. Figure out what is
Yeah.
the best way to, like, the fastest way to solve it, right? Just because,
Yeah, it
yeah,
really comes down to that. It's the fastest way you get through it and then you don't run out of time.
exactly. Yeah. And even if you do have to learn this new process, don't be afraid to learn it. Even like you know how to solve it, but let's say it takes you 10 minutes, but this new way only takes you three minutes. Don't be afraid to learn the new way and be faster, because that could save you a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people kind of know that, but saying it makes you aware of it and makes you like no, I don't need to be afraid of learning the new way to approach this problem, and you should have an open mind and be willing
Yeah,
to
an
learn.
open
Yeah,
mind.
that's
Yeah.
that's actually a really good point. Okay, now before the exam, the day before your FE exam, uh, what did you do? Were you feeling stressed? Were you going over problems? What was your day like?
Yeah, so definitely I was stressed. I was very, very stressed, maybe like 3 weeks before my exam. I was so nervous because the first time I like just kind of was like, all right, I'm gonna just take it, you know? And then the second time I was just determined, you know, I mean, I kind of told myself there's nothing wrong with failing or taking the test over and over again. And then at the same time, I was really motivated, like, you know, it's okay. But at the same time, like, I still need to be very determined to pass. So leading up to the exam, I took, I think, 2 practice exams. I think I took the one that was in the Google Drive is mainly for civil. So I kind of I narrowed down on what's environmental, and I kind of picked and choose and practiced my timing. I practiced the anthem book as like a real setting test, and then finally like the actual practice book. So before the exam, I was pretty nervous. At work, I was like studying during my lunches and like kind of just every opportunity I could, just for that like time leading up to there. I wouldn't recommend that like all the time, because then you're just gonna be so tired all the time. And then definitely on the day before the exam, I kind of like conceptually reviewed things, but I wasn't like, I need to practice this problem again. I just relaxed, and I was like, my test is also like, I had to do an afternoon session because I was the only one there. So I kind of just, the day before, I did a little bit of studying, but then that morning of, I just made breakfast, coffee, and I just relaxed, and I was like, okay, like, we're gonna do this, and just gotta go into it strong. Just can't be like cramming these last minute things. Just kind of gotta go for it.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach. Like, don't guys try to do new problem the day before the FE. It will just
Oh yeah,
more than help
yeah,
you. You're gonna feel like very stressed.
yeah. And I mean, like, to get super specific too, like thermodynamics was just something I had a hard time with in college, and that's a subject that's on the environmental FE. And I was really stressed because I feel like I didn't study that as much. But on my exam, and even just looking back and reviewing like the specs on what your exam consists of, there's only 3 thermo questions. So I was like, do I really need to cram right now? And then I took my exam and the questions weren't that hard. So like, I'm glad I didn't stress myself out that more. I think just kind of like understanding like what was on the specs for my exam too is just was really helpful.
Yeah, I think you're very tuned with your body, and you're very aware of your thoughts, and you really try to communicate with yourself a lot. And I think that's really important, because like a lot of times, like I was reading this paper the other day, and they were like, apparently 95% of our thoughts, they are in our unconscious mind. So which means they're like happening, but we're not even aware of them, and only 5% of our thoughts that are like from our conscious mind. So a lot
Mhm.
of times you have all these self-doubts about yourself, and like, how maybe, like I should really cram thermodynamics before the FE. But what you did is you took that thought, you brought it to your conscious mind, and you're like, wait, let's take a look at this from a logic standpoint. We have
Mhm.
3 questions on the FE. That's not going to be worth it, right?
Yeah.
uh, and I think that's really important, like throughout this journey, to really try to be aware of what's happening in your mind, so that way so that you stay positive, and you make sure that you are on the right track, and you make sure that you're studying the right way. Because a lot of times, like you mentioned earlier, just with the questions, when you're answering them, we are stuck on our own way. So if there's a method that works for you in college, you might want to try that method. And
Mhm.
the problem happens is that if that method doesn't work, you gotta learn how to adjust, adapt, and figure out what's gonna work so that you pass your
Mm-hmm.
exam, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's just like, yeah, it can be like challenging if you're not aware of those thoughts. Like it can actually like hurt you.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's dive into the day of the exam. How were you feeling during the exam?
Um, During the exam, I was very nervous. It wasn't like, oh, I did all this preparation and this second time around was easy. No, it was still hard. The questions were just, I think the biggest thing was that I kind of I was kind of just really caught up on what I missed last time or what I knew I struggled with, that I kind of studied a lot for what I thought I'd missed. But on the day of the exam, like when I took it, I don't think I had many similar questions to what I previously saw at all. And I think that's the biggest thing about what's struggling with taking the exam over and over again, is that like there's such a large bank of questions that you almost never really get any similar questions or material. And I just had all these brand new set of questions and I had a hard time just kind of like getting started. And I think the biggest thing was like the morning session. Um, I think what was really helpful was kind of like another thing I also probably heard from your channel was like, you just go through all the questions. Whatever you absolutely don't know, maybe know, kind of know, like you just flag it. So I think on the day of the exam, it's really important you do great on what you know. I know how to do this problem, I do it. And if I don't know it, I'm not going to waste my time. Like I probably skipped like a huge amount of questions, but after I go back and look at it again and you reread it, you realize you're like, oh wait, no, I do know how to do this. So that was the biggest thing, was just if I knew it, I did it. If I kind of knew it, then I went back and then just kind of over and over and over again until you have no more questions left. So there was probably still a lot, like maybe like 5 or 6 that I had to guess on for each session. Maybe the second session I guess on a lot more, but definitely just kind of like don't waste time. Just go through it once, twice, even 4 times. Like if you just had that many you had to skip.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really. I usually recommend that because like you get the easy questions first, which then you feel less stressed. You're like, okay, I got at least the easy questions,
Mhm.
and like it's interesting you mentioned this because I when I took the exam, I actually felt the same way. Like there were some questions that I kind of knew, and I would just like flag them, and I will come back to it, and I'm like, oh, well, this is actually easier than I thought.
Yeah.
But first, when
Yeah.
you question, you freak out. You're like, okay, I can't do this. I'm gonna flag it. I'll come back to it later.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you come back and you take a second, then you're like, okay, I can do this. And I think especially like the first maybe the first 15, 30 minutes you're still a little bit shaking, you're anxious, you're like
Yes.
nervous.
Yeah.
So like a lot of the, like if you get a hard question, like even though like it's easy, you might actually freak out. It's just because you're still in that like anxious state yet, you haven't like
Yeah.
reached that calm level yet. So in that
Yeah.
way, just get the easy questions, and then when you feel more calm and you're like into the, you feel like you're just in the zone, like you don't even, that's it, right? Like you're just doing one question after the other one. When you're in
Yeah.
the zone, then you can go to the hard questions. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's intimidating, definitely, because you take like the practice exams and the question is like one line. And then you take the FE and you just see every question is like a paragraph, and it's intimidating. It's like any other standardized test where they're trying to throw you off. So that's the biggest thing too, is just kind of like not be super intimidated. Like the question is probably a lot more narrowed like down than you think, and just kind of like, yeah, just kind of get over that freaking out phase.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. Like a lot of times, like you see this whole paragraph, and you're like, your
Mhm.
first thing is like freaking out. Like, wow, this is a lot of words. I don't even have,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah, a lot of words and like no free body diagrams, and you're like, where do I go from here?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think actually like the best way to approach those problems is just like as you're reading, try to write down like what's giving to you and what's not giving to you, so that
Yes. Yeah.
and your brain is working as you're going through those unknowns and knowns. Your brain is telling you, maybe we should use this equation, maybe we should use this equation, and then you just narrow it down. Another thing
Mhm.
that can be useful is that actually sometimes I do this. I would read what they're asking for first. So I would literally go to the end of the question and be like, okay, they're asking for this. And that actually helps me to stay engaged. And I'm like, okay, so
Okay.
like we're looking at like, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out what would be like a long problem. Like I'm gonna just go with structural analysis. I know environmental major, but right now structural analysis is in my head.
Mhm.
So we're trying to find like a bending moment for like a concrete beam, right? So
Mhm.
like if I read that, then I go back and I go like, okay, so let me see what I need to look for. Like what do I need? This is the unknowns. This is what's giving to me, and then you can narrow it down, and then it makes it go a little bit faster. So that's another method that
Yeah.
that
And
can.
then like, yeah, like you said, like once you have all of your like knowns and unknowns written, you realize like, oh, I have almost every single term for the Manning's equation. I'm missing like two things. And then you're like, well, it's definitely that one then. Like you just
Yeah,
realize.
yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely like what I found helpful as well.
Okay, that's great. Now, another thing I want to mention is that you mentioned that so you went in and you were expecting a little bit. Some of the questions would be the same as when you
Mhm.
took it the first time. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's something common. A lot of people like go in and be like,
Yeah.
I didn't get the same questions as last time, and I was studying those questions and I know them now, but I got different questions, and
Hmm.
so just to kind of like explain a little bit how the exam goes, and we actually not because you took the FE January. It was we started the meetups after I think you passed the FE. So now we do meetups with all of our students, engineer students. We meet every Friday, and we do like a Zoom call for like an hour. People talk about like I usually provide tips on how to. Yesterday we talked about confidence, like how to be confident about your abilities for the exam, and then
Hmm.
after that we usually students would ask questions. One of the questions from yesterday was actually talking about this. So like when do
Hmm.
they change the questions for the FE? And so
Hmm.
it turns out that like usually like it's because you can only take the exam 3 times, right? And so there's a window. So there's like a quarter window. So like from January to like March, you get a different exam. So for example, if you took the exam on January and you want to take it again in March, you can't. You have to wait
Oh,
for the
okay.
other window so that you
Hmm.
don't take the same exam. So
Hmm.
that's how it usually works. So you have Monday to March, and then April to like June or something, and so on.
Hmm.
And so that's why your exam was different than the one you took in July.
Oh, I mean that makes total sense now because yeah, like they're not just gonna give you the same exam, but yeah,
So
definitely, yeah, definitely. That's why I realized why people say take the exam at certain times too. Just like if you're taking the exam, like when I took my exam, I did not want to take it in the summer, but I had to. And if you take it in the summer, everyone else is taking it too, and then inevitably like the average for that exam is probably a lot more higher than if you do it at like a time where not a lot of people are taking it.
yeah,
Unfortunately.
yeah, that's true. And especially because like when they opened the exams, so a lot of people couldn't take it during the year because of COVID, and then they opened
Yeah.
in July, and then you had everybody was trying to get in.
Yeah.
So that's probably it. But also, I think, you pass because you're good and you did amazing and you deserve to pass. So
Hope so.
let's not focus on the curve and, like how the scoring or because you didn't take
Yeah.
it with a lot of people. I don't think it has to do with any of that. I think you did amazing, and I think you're a great engineer and you proved yourself that you passed the FE. So celebrate that.
Thanks.
Don't make it like seem like you barely pass or things like that. Yeah. All right, now so do you remember how many hours you spent on the first half versus the second half?
Yeah, so surprisingly, I spent more time on the first half. I just don't know if it was like the nervous jitters. Like I know majority of people spend more time on the second half, but I think it was more that I was picking up the pace and the routine of just going through questions, not knowing something, so going through it again and just narrowing down what I did know. So my first part, because they don't give you a cutoff time, they just tell you like there's recommendations like you spend 2.5 hours on the first part, 30-minute break, and then 3 hours on the rest. So it was approaching maybe like 2.5, almost 3 hours for the first one, and I was like, oh my god, like I'm still taking a long time. So definitely, I think the first half I took like 2 hours and 45 minutes. Just kind of like I was in the beginning, I was super nervous again. Like I definitely like speaking now, I feel like I speak more confident about it, but like I was having a like awful time, just really nervous, really trying to like just like lock in and just go for the test. But definitely the second half, I spent like the 3 hours, but it went by really fast. I don't know if it's just like, like it's just inevitable that like when you're doing the last half, it just kind of is flying by. But I had like 30 minutes left and I answered everything. And I realized like I didn't have a hard time on many of the problems. And like I had a few that like I had to completely guess on, but I still was able to, it wasn't like a total, like I didn't know anything guess. Like I still had time to figure it out. So I think that was the biggest thing was just like I keep like reiterating like when you first go through, it's like go through what you know, flag what you don't, and then just keep going back and back. Like the second half of the exam, I probably went back like my last round was like a fourth round because it
Wow.
just yeah it just felt like that was a really helpful like technique to do that I didn't do the first time. The first time I was like spending like so much time on problems I didn't know and I could have used to figure out problems I do know. So
Yeah.
definitely that was just the biggest thing.
Awesome. Okay. Now, how many questions did you have to guess?
Um, let's see. For me, what I found really like kind of frustrating just on my part was that like I said, like now I know like how the different exams work at the different times you take it, but my second time taking the exam, I didn't have any drag and drop questions like where you pick and you match things kind of like that. I had almost all multiple choice questions and I had maybe like 3 or 4 fill in the blanks. Those ones I definitely had to guess on. So I think maybe the first half I had to guess on about 8 to 10 questions. And then the second half, it was probably like, it was a lot of questions. It was probably like 10 to 15 on the last half. But I think just the second half, I had more time to like kind of make more educated guesses.
Hmm.
But definitely like many of the guesses I made were just, I have no idea. Just C, B.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's normal. You're not expected to answer all the questions correctly. You
Yeah.
probably have some questions that you have no idea about, and you're gonna have to guess them. Okay. And now, were you feeling confident when you finished the exam?
Not at all. I was kind of in shock at the time where I was like, wow, like it felt just as hard as the first one. It felt very intimidating. I felt better only because I didn't have to just blankly guess on a lot of things. So that was mainly, and it was almost like when you kind of have imposter syndrome and like when you kind of like I did answer a lot of the questions and I was like, oh, that was it, that was easy, but wait, was it too easy, like did I do something? And then like that's kind of where it came in where I felt unconfident, was like I didn't want to like feel like, oh, that was so easy, like I did do it correctly and then like actually did it. So definitely like I was just really nervous about what I did find to be really easy and then again like what I felt like I didn't know at all, like again. So definitely it was like a 50-50. Like it was still a little unconfident, but I was also afraid of like the confidence I had about what I did know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it happens to a lot of us. I felt the same way when I was done with the exam. I was like,
Mhm.
well, there were some really easy questions, but was that it? Did I miss
Yeah.
anything? And then,
Yeah.
and then the harder ones was like, oof, did I guess that right? Did I did like I had
Mhm.
doubt literally the whole week. till I got my results. Like I literally,
Yeah. Yeah.
when people would ask me, like my mom asked, I was like, honestly, I have no idea. It
Yeah.
could either go like really bad, failing, or like pass. like,
Yeah.
I didn't know where I was. Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely didn't want to be like, oh, like, yeah, that was so easy, but then I didn't pass, you
Yeah.
know? Like, I was just really nervous about that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Like, because you didn't want to tell people, like, oh, that was really easy. A week later, oh, it turns out I didn't pass. They just feel
Yeah.
stupid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, are there any areas that were difficult that you wish you would have studied more?
So I feel like my learning from my mistakes from the first exam was a lot of what's on the morning session you can easily do in your calculator. Like you don't have to do standard deviation, all this stuff. Like I think, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I struggled with was just not knowing. I think we mentioned it before, just like the efficiency of just answering problems. And like that was just like my biggest thing. Um, Definitely like harder subjects are um, definitely more focused on, I don't know if I hear civil, like a lot of like the statics and dynamics and structural like subjects were really difficult. I mean, thankfully I didn't have statics or dynamics, but still the environmental sections were still pretty hard. Water resources, you have all these different values that you have to keep track of. And then I mentioned this a lot, like air pollution and chemistry were kind of hard. Chemistry, like when you're naming like certain elements or just you have to like kind of know it or you don't. So definitely when it gets more, I recommend for like environmental, like when it gets more to those sections, you should conceptually make sure you understand rather than just, you know, it gets to that point where in those sections, it's not really about like knowing the units and like that. Like you still have to know, especially because I feel for environmental, there's a lot of conceptual questions. I think in general, they increased the amount of conceptual questions, but like there was a lot of questions on conceptual things that like I knew it or I didn't, or I had to really dig into the manual and like find what they were talking about, just like one little part of a huge paragraph or subject. So understanding the manual was definitely important too, that I didn't really think of my first round. So
So now that you took the FE and you realized there were a lot of conceptual questions, if you had to go back and redo this, how would you prepare for the conceptual questions?
So actually, Pranitha, I'm not sure if I said her name incorrectly, but she gave me a really awesome tip, which was to look at my specs for my exam. And a lot of what they said in the specs, like if I just wrote down the definition of it, I really was able to answer a lot of the conceptual questions. Like there was a lot, like in the environmental, it mentioned like something random, like eutrophication in your specs. And I wrote down the definition for that and I literally got a question on it. So like I think that's the biggest thing is if you want to tackle the conceptual portion is you print out your specs and you just go through what every single term is like asking. It sounds tedious, but like when I went through every single term, I knew the definition of it or I knew like just a simple equation for what that was. That really helped for all the conceptual questions that I wish I knew the first time because definitely I know the conceptual is definitely a lot of what people struggle with.
Yeah, yeah. And she actually mentioned the same tip when she was preparing for FE exam. That's what she did to pass.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
that was a really great tip for me to know.
yeah, yeah. So and I started recommending it to students to like make sure that you guys look up the word. Just go to Google, look up the definition of the words
Yeah,
from the specifications.
yeah.
And yeah, we're getting a lot of like feedback from that. That it has helped a lot of students. Yeah.
Because definitely, like you mentioned earlier, like when I wanted to take the exam and I had no air pollution class yet, like I couldn't learn a whole class like semester's worth of material. So you just kind of had to like focus like what is the exam actually asking for and just go off of there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Now, let's talk about your life after passing the exam. Did it affect or did it impact your professional life?
So for me, I work in solid waste, and it's definitely like a job where it services the public. So it's not like where you work for like the city or the state where you have to have your. I don't know if that's exactly how it works, where you have to have your FE or your EIT before even applying. But for me, it's like heavily recommended that I have my EIT, and then eventually, like if I want to be able to stamp my name on plans, I need a PE. So definitely, like it's like for my job specifically. If you are doing design work and you want this to be your project or you oversee it, like you got to take the EIT and you got to take your PE eventually. So definitely like the environmental and civil field, yeah, like I feel like it opens a lot of doors for you if you want to be higher up in your position. You definitely want to have this exam like over with, and you want to show that like you stand out from others. So
Yeah.
to move up, definitely.
Okay. Now, do you have any closing remarks on for engineers who are trying to pass their FE exam?
So I think definitely you want to go into it being confident. Like it does really suck when you fail the test a couple times and you feel like you gave it your all and you didn't pass. So I just feel like it's important to just see past that and just see that, you may have gave it your all, but just because you did doesn't mean like you are going to pass. Like you have to be uncomfortable and comfortable with learning new like techniques and how you study, and just kind of like not psyching yourself out if like, oh, like I told myself I was going to study like 5 hours today but I only studied 3, like oh, like am I still going to be able to pass? Like you still got to know your own pace when you need a rest. And definitely just, I think the biggest thing for me was just not focusing on how other people like studied and passed, like just learning all these different ways and seeing what's the best way for me. Because I just think when I focused more on what I did wrong, which I felt was really unconventional to what a lot of people felt like they did wrong, like I focused on myself, and then I just like took the test one more time and passed. So that was like my biggest thing. It's just focusing on myself.
That's great. Thank you, Alicia, for your time and for being with us today. You really shared some great tips, and I'm sure it's going to help a lot of students. So thank you for joining us and sharing your FE experience.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
No problem. I really enjoyed talking to Alicia. She did share some really amazing tips with us today, and I really hope it helps you guys with your FE preparation. Now, if you guys like this video, please give us a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe for new videos every week. Thank you guys for watching. Good luck with your studying, and I will see you soon. À la prochaine.